Today, I'm going to give you 5 tips for running more memorable NPCs in your D&D or other tabletop role-playing game. Hi, I'm Jared. This is In Character Games, and for the past 40 years, I've been running games for my friends, and along the way, I've learned a lot of tips and tricks on how to run NPCs, and I'm going to share several of those with you today. The first tip that we're going to talk about has to do with what I like to call one-shot NPCs. No, these are not NPCs for one-shot adventures. These are NPCs that the players are ever only going to deal with once. Generally, these are unplanned, random NPCs that your players come across due to whatever is happening in the story or whatever the players have asked to do. For example, they want to go to a blacksmith shop, so you need to come up with a blacksmith very quickly. That is the sort of thing I mean by a one-shot NPC. It's an NPC that wasn't planned, isn't ever going to probably be spoken to again, and you don't have a lot of prep time for how you're going to represent them. For one of these NPCs, I always pick one trait, just one thing about them that is important and that I know that I can role play. This might be their emotion, like if it's a NPC that has been captured by the players, that might be fear. If it is a nobleman who looks down on the players as lowly adventurers, then it might be how they're haughty. Whatever it is, I take that one thing and I focus on it through all of the role playing in that scene. This lets me really latch onto that one thing and drive everything from the scene from that one trait. It's going to make your role playing more pointed and give your players something to remember. They'll remember that scared goblin or that haughty noble or that gruff blacksmith because you picked that one trait to really drive home. You don't have time on spur of the moment to pick a bunch of different traits. So by just picking the one, you free yourself up from a bunch of decisions that you'll have to make and let yourself role play that one trait better. The second group of NPCs, and the second tip for running memorable NPCs, has to do with recurring NPCs. These are going to be your allies, your sidekicks, or your villains of a particular story that you know that your players are going to interact with more than once. For those sorts of NPCs, you want a more nuanced, multi-layered approach. Now, you can go and make a new character wholesale and come up with all of those nuances yourself. Or you can use a trick that I learned years ago from another game master, where you pick somebody from your life, Hollywood, or television, and you mimic that person's personality within that NPC. Now, you're not trying to be an actor here. You're not attempting to portray that person such that your players will recognize who it is. What you're really doing is putting that person in your mind's eye while you're role playing so that you can think about how that person would react to whatever the PCs are saying. You're not trying to make it so the PCs will guess who it is that you're portraying. You're just giving yourself a guidepost, a mental guidepost on how this NPC is going to react. And it really frees you up from making a bunch of extra decisions about the NPC's personality. For example, let's say your PCs have run into a down on their luck ship captain. You could say, well, I'm going to have this down on their luck captain be portrayed in my mental image as Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly. So you don't tell the characters, the players rather, you don't tell the players that they look like Malcolm Reynolds. You just describe them as if you were describing Nathan Fillion. You play as if you were playing as Nathan Fillion. You play as if you were playing Malcolm Reynolds. And that guidepost will just help your role playing to be more nuanced. And then when you can't think of how they would react, you can fall back to what you know about that character or that real life person, whoever it is that you're portraying this character as. I find that it makes role-playing as them much, much easier and much more nuanced. The third tip for running memorable NPCs in your game is to not overwhelm the players. Players have a limited attention span, and you can't overwhelm them with NPC after NPC after NPC introduced all at once within an encounter. Or in an adventure, if you introduce too many, they're going to start to lose connection with the ones that they've already met within an adventure as you introduce more and more. My general rule of thumb is I don't introduce more than 3 new NPCs in any one encounter and more than half a dozen or so NPCs in any one adventure. Now, of course, like all good tips and tricks or rules, I'm going to break this later on in the discussion, but that's generally the rule I go with. What this allows you to do is, as you introduce each of these new NPCs, your players get the chance to role play with them and make connections with them. That way, when they meet them again, they'll have a memory of them. If you just rapid fire introduce them to a bunch of NPCs, then they don't have that opportunity to make that connection. And the next time they meet them, they're going to look at you like they don't remember this NPC because they don't. The fourth tip for role-playing memorable NPCs for your game is to give your players a visual representation of the NPC. Now, I only do this for recurring NPCs. I don't do this for one-shot NPCs because obviously I don't have a bunch of graphics just laying around ready to go for random NPCs that the players are going to meet. But for those recurring NPCs, I will, if I'm playing in person, I will print out a picture of the NPC. If I'm playing on a virtual tabletop, then I will make either a token or download an image to represent that NPC that I can show to the players through the virtual tabletop. Or if we're playing on just Discord, then I will just share that image on Discord. This visual image of the NPC is really powerful for players to instantly connect with that NPC. Our brains are hardwired to visual stimulus, and memories and connections are much easier to make through that visual stimulus than it is through just a verbal description that I, as a game master, give my players during a scene. So if you really want to punch up how your players connect to the NPCs and make them more memorable, print out an image or use VTT and share an image of the NPC. One trick I've found on Foundry is to use, I think it's called mouse over or hover over, where when you hover over the token, it will actually show an image in one corner that you can specify the full image that the character is based on. The fifth tip I have for running memorable NPCs is actually going to fly in the face of tip number 3, and that is to flood your players with choice. Now, I don't mean all the time just throw NPC after NPC after NPC at players. No, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're really talking about is when the players have a decision, whether in some sort of political arena or when dealing with a group of patrons or something where you have multiple people that the players may interact with, and you want to give them a choice of who they're going to side with or who they're going to align themselves with. I give about half a dozen choices, and I will have written up and thought of how these NPCs all act and will react to the NPCs. But by giving the PCs the choice of who they want to make a deal with, choice of who they want to align themselves with, I've instantly really hooked my players into that NPC. Because they've made the choice, because they're the ones who decided who they would go with, whether it's NPC 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, that choice instantly makes our brain think that this thing is important. We have been forced to make a choice, we've made the choice, and now we want to stick by that choice, and we want to know what that choice meant. So it's a trick that I've used many times on play groups where I've really given over the choice of who they're going to deal with to them, and they're able to make that decision. And by doing that, I've connected that NPC very well to the players. So those are my 5 tips for how to make NPCs more memorable. If you've got some other way that you use to make NPCs memorable, drop them down in the comments below. If you'd like to support the channel, I'd really appreciate a like or a subscribe. And if you're interested in what we're making at In Character Games, there will be a link to the website down in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.